Salutations and welcome back to Page 3 Killers Headline Minis, where we talk about the cases that stole the headlines. Hi guys, welcome back to another intriguing episode of Page 3 Killers Headline Minis. This is episode 3. I can't believe it. We're already 3 deep in this one, and I think we're, 10 deep in our regular podcast? So, oh man, we're moving through them. Can't wait until we finally end the first season, and, hopefully we'll have more viewers by then. But for all of those of you who tune in regularly, I'd like to do a shout out to Stacy and Joe. Thanks, guys, for listening. We really appreciate it. Now, today's episode of Headline Minis is going to be on Dr. Harold Shipman. Now, this comes straight across the pond from England, Manchester to be specific. Now, this happened primarily between 1995 and 1998. And this was one of our big news stories for another case that we did for our regular podcast. Now, Dr. Harold Shipman was that general practitioner, so basically a doctor who was found guilty of murdering like 15 patients. And I believe that there are numbers they think that he could have killed upwards around 250 or 215 people, which is insane to me. I don't understand how a doctor can kill that many patients and it not be recognized. But things happen, I guess. And it does cause a lot of changes for the medical fields. But let's get into what happened with Dr. Harold Shipman so that you guys can get the full scope of the story and not just, the general information I just gave. So Harold Frederick Shipman was born on January 14th of 1946, and he did pass away back in 2004. Now, he was an English doctor, like I said, and he is believed to be one of their most prolific serial killers in modern history. Everything starts to come together in March of 1998 when Dr. Linda Reynolds from the Brooks Surgery in Hyde began to express concerns to the South Manchester District Coroner, John Pollard, about the high death rate among Shipman's elderly patients, specifically the female population. Many of his patients were elderly female. He did have, as always, there was men, women, children, but he had a high number of elderly women passing away from very strange maladies that they didn't have prior to, they all seemed healthy, so they didn't seem to be sick. Police had a hard time finding any evidence of any wrongdoing when Dr. Linda Reynolds and John Pollard went to them with their concerns. They closed the investigation shortly after it was opened on April 17th of 1998 because they just said that there wasn't any evidence that they were elderly patients. They seem to have died from, old age, which happens, because once you're up there in age, you get more health issues. So they said, there was nothing strange about that. But she kept pushing it because she was concerned at the large number of cremation forms that he needed countersigned. So apparently in their medical system, how it works is they have to have somebody sign off on their findings. So since he pronounced them dead, he would fill out the form saying that of what they died from, and then he would have to get it countersigned by another physician. It was really odd. She noticed that there was a lot that were being cremated, higher than normal, especially for that age group. So after the police dismiss it, they later open up this giant inquiry that basically finds the Greater Manchester Police, responsible for not stopping him sooner. And they basically say, that they assigned too many inexperienced officers to the case, and that's why none of it was linked together. They didn't have enough people, resources, or anything working on it, so they really didn't think that it was a big deal, and it turned out to be way bigger of a deal than what they actually thought. So after the investigation was closed, Shipman did kill another 3 people that they found. So in closing that investigation on April 17th, allowed him to continue killing people, and he ended up killing 3 more people and damaging 3 whole entire families with this. Now, in August of that year, John Shaw, a taxi driver, he also went to the police because he was finding that a number of his, regular riders. So he was known to like pick up the elderly, and he would take them to and from their appointments. So he's the taxi service that they would call. And he noticed that 21 of his normal riders had passed away, like within the last year or so, that were all patients of Dr. Shipman. And he said, it didn't seem right to him because they were in good health. There was nothing wrong with them. And so he felt that something was hinky, and he went to the Manchester police, and he brought their concerns to them. But they didn't take it seriously. Not until Shipman's last victim. And this is where Shipman royally fucks up. I mean, this takes the cake, okay? So Shipman's MO was that he would, inject his patients with a drug that they would overdose, basically. And, he would write up in their records that they had cancer or something, something deadly like that, and that it just wasn't spotted in time. And nobody cross-checked. They were being cremated. Until his last victim, Catherine Grundy. Now, his big mistake with this one person is that her daughter is a lawyer, okay? So her daughter, Angela Woodruff, is a lawyer. And for some reason, he thought he could get away with forging not a life insurance policy, but a will. So he basically forges this will, which is what he did with all of his other patients that he killed, was that he forged a will, making him, and including him in it for a certain amount of money. He got greedy here, and he took the fake will to another lawyer who knew Angela and her mother. And his name was Brian Burgess. And Brian Burgess saw this will come across his desk, and he said, "Whoa, hold up. This is Angela's mom." So he goes to Angela and he says, "Hey, I think there's something weird going on, because I just got a will brought to my office by your mom's doctor, or this doctor, and you're not included in it, you or your children," which was absolutely, ridiculous that she wouldn't include her daughter and her grandchildren in her will. It seemed weird, and he recommended that she go to the police and take it to them. Dr. Shipman, on Catherine Grundy's death certificate, wrote down that her cause of death was old age. That's kind of important because she's going to be, I believe, one of the first victims that they actually test for any drugs or anything that. So she is tested forensically. Her DNA and everything is tested to see what was in her system at the time of her death. So Angela Woodruff goes into the police and she makes a report, and because of this. Her main piece of evidence is that her mother would never have left her out of her will, especially because the total of her worth was £386,000. Now, that's an insane amount of money. So the police think, okay, yeah, all right, let's investigate this. So the police exhume Kathleen Grundy's body, and they find traces of dihydromorphine. Basically, it's heroin in her system, which they use to treat cancer in terminally ill patients. Problem is that Kathleen Grundy did not have cancer, let alone terminal cancer, okay? So this is just getting absolutely ridiculous. Shipman claims that, Kathleen wasn't a drug addict, and he was just helping her. And he showed them her medical records, thinking that he's going to be slick and he's going to be able to just say, that she's a drug addict. So, of course, she was going to die. Not a big deal. Unfortunately, the records that he handed over were electronic, and they could tell his footsteps on the file. So when they start taking a look at Kathleen's records from his office, they find that he has altered them afterwards. So he went in and he added all of these notes that she was addicted to heroin and had all of these other issues into her medical record. So they're just like, why are you changing the records? So they start looking through other records and find similar written comments in other files. So now they're like, okay, this is really fishy. All right, this guy is up to something. So they arrest him on September 7th of 1998. And what they find is in his possession is the Brother typewriter that was used to forge the will for Kathleen Grundy. The police are like, okay, so has he done more than this? Because now they're looking at it and they're like, wow, a doctor really capable of actually killing patients? They start looking through other records for the same MO, okay? So death by old age or a drug overdose. The fact that he was in the will of said patient. They go back and they start combing through and they find another 15 cases that are possible. So they start doing this thing where they start exhuming the bodies and testing their blood to see if they too have been administered a lethal drug cocktail to kill them, which appears to be his pattern. He would administer a lethal dose of dimorphine. He would sign patients' death certificates and then falsify medical records to indicate that they were in poorer health than they were. So this investigation, which was dubbed the Shipman Inquiry by the UK, by their news, by their police force. So it was the Shipman Inquiry. And that lasted 2 years where they investigated death certificates signed off on by Dr. Shipman. And the woman that chaired this inquiry, her name was Janet Smith. And she was the one that headed this investigation. And they found that he may have killed around 215 to 250. And 80% of those were elderly women. They also confirmed that his youngest victim was a 41-year-old man. Now, he goes to trial for 15 murders on October 5th of 1999. Yes, 1999. So those 15 women are Marie West, Irene Turner, Lizzie Adams, Jan Lilly, Ivy Lomas, Meryl Grimshaw, Marie Quinn, Kathleen Wagstaff, Nora Nuttall, Pamela Hilter, Maureen Ward, Winifred Mallory, Joan Mala, and Kathleen Grundy. And then there was, I'm going to pronounce this so bad, Bianca Pomfret. I'm hoping that, I'm so sorry if I butchered that, but that is the closest I'm going to get on the pronunciation of that name. So he goes to trial for all of these cases, and Shipman's legal representative tried unsuccessfully to have Grundy's case tried separately from the others, as it was the cornerstone of the investigation. It is the one that showed basically the pattern. That he could say, all these other ones, you don't have any evidence that I killed them. Kathleen Grundy's the only one that has evidence that he killed them, So on January 31st of 2000, after 6 days of deliberation, a jury did find Dr. Shipman guilty of 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery. The judge sitting on that, Mr. Justice Forbes, subsequently sentenced Shipman to a life term. Basically, he got life in prison on all 15 counts of murder, with a recommendation that he never be released. So all of his sentences were to be served concurrently, with a sentence of 4 years with forgery for Grundy's will. So basically, he's never getting out of prison. He's going to die there. Now, on February 11th, 10 days after his conviction, Shipman was basically struck off as a general medical counsel. So he was no longer considered a doctor. So they basically revoked his license to practice medicine, which obviously, he's going to be in prison, so he wouldn't be practicing, I would assume. And 2 years later, David Bunkett, who was the Home Secretary at the time, confirmed that the judge's whole life tariff was reasonable. So he basically confirmed the judge's ruling. And just months before that was just months before the British government ministries lost their power to set a minimum term for prisoners. Authorities only brought the 15 charges, but they believe that there was many more. And to the day of his death, Shipman denied his guilt in any murders. He said that he didn't commit a murder, that it was all made up. There was he disputes the scientific evidence against him. He also made many public statements about his innocence. Now, Shipman's wife, Primrose, was steadfast, in her belief that her husband was innocent of all of the crimes, that he didn't murder anybody. And we do have to note that he wasn't the first British doctor to basically commit murder using his position to find victims and such. John Bodkin, John Bodkin Adams was charged in 1957 with murdering several of his patients, amid rumors that he killed dozens more over a 10-year period. And it's believed that he was the role model for Shipman in committing these murders, and that was stated by historian Pamela Cullen. She basically, said that because Adams was acquitted, it made it easier for Shipman to be able to do what he did, because nothing changed in the way that the medical system worked, and it showed some very big flaws in the British legal system. up until the Shipman case. So if this guy, other doctor, had been, charged with something more substantial than nothing, it might have been a deterrent from anyone else doing the exact same thing, and basically pointed out that, hey, we need to make some changes in our medical system and in our law to make sure that we're protecting our citizens, even from the people that are supposed to be taking care of them. On January 13th of 2004, so Dr. Shipman has been in prison for a few years, not as many. I mean, he was only just found guilty in, 2000. So he was only in prison for 4 years. And on January 13th, he hung himself in his cell at the Wakefield prison at 6:20 a.m. one day before his 58th birthday. There was a statement from Her Majesty's Prison Service indicating that he had hung himself from the bars of his windows in his cell using his bed sheets. After Shipman's death, his body was taken to a mortuary in a medico-legal center for a post-mortem examination. And the West Yorkshire coroner, David Hincliffe, eventually released the body to the family after an inquest was opened and adjourned shortly after. And it basically just found that his death was a suicide. Some of the victims' family felt that they were cheated by Shipman's suicide and that he should have been under more strict control, and that, that shouldn't have happened. So they felt like justice didn't serve them right, and, him taking his life was just adding more fuel to the fire of their, upset and pain. So they were very distraught by this. They wanted him to serve more time than the 4 years that he had served. Now, the Home Secretary, David Bunkett, said that celebration was tempting. And here's the quote that he gave. "You wake up and you receive a call telling you Shipman has topped himself. And you think, is it too early to open a bottle? And then you discover that everybody's very upset that he's done it." Which I think was, just a nice quote to have in here for you guys to understand, he celebrated it, and he's like, and then he found out that, other people weren't as happy about it. Newspapers in England were divided, their national newspapers were divided on Shipman's death when they announced it. So the Daily Mirror branded him a cold coward and condemned the prison service for allowing his suicide to happen. And then you had the Sun Ray, who also, they posted a celebratory front page headline called "Ship, Ship, Hooray." And that was their big headline. And the Independent called for an inquiry into Shipman's suicide, and wanted them to look more widely at the state of U.S. or UK prisons, as well as the welfare of inmates. So they, there was a lot of division. Some were celebratory, other ones were calling for, they wanted, somebody to really investigate, the prison system and the welfare of inmates, because if he was able to take his own life in a prison, he obviously wasn't under enough visual, what would be the word right here? I'm trying to think of. He just wasn't under enough supervision, visual supervision. So they felt, something should be done about that. So that kicks off another thing that we're not going to talk about today. So Shipman's motive for suicide was never established. Shipman had reportedly told his probation officer that he was considering suicide to assure his wife's financial security before he was stripped of his National Health Service pension. And Primrose Shipman did receive his NHS pension after his death. She would not have been entitled to it if he had lived past 60. around this time, once he got into prison, his wife started to suspect that not everything he was telling her was correct. She started to think that he could possibly be lying to her about, having committed the murders. So she was starting to become suspicious and all that. And he had told that to one of his cellmates, that, he had felt that she wasn't believing him anymore. And in fact, one of his cellmates said that he'd received a letter from his wife Primrose urging him to tell me everything no matter what. So she was trying to find out the truth, did you really do it or not? Now, after the body of Dr. Shipman was released, of course, they had some issues. They were worried about his grave being desecrated and stuff like that by angry family members. The funeral home basically recommended that they hold off for like a year with a burial or anything. And I believe he ended up being cremated, and his remains returned to his wife. And I believe the service took place outside normal hours for the crematorium, and was held in secrecy, and was only attended by Primrose and his children, his 4 children. Now, the aftermath of this entire thing, basically you had massive changes to the medical system because of this. They basically changed how they had to issue death certificates and apply for cremations. So basically they had to sign, there was like a questionnaire, and if any of the boxes were checked off, you were not allowed to move forward without a coroner exam. So basically they would ask you questions like, do you suspect foul play? Do you think that your loved one was hurt prior to, their death? So they really changed all of that. And I mean, this case was just so crazy. Just all of the information that I found that I can't fit into this episode because we're coming up on 30 minutes. But that is everything on Dr. Harold Shipman. And I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I enjoyed looking at it. I mean, I had seen, a bunch of things about this and some of the articles. In fact, I will have on our tile for this episode, I'll make sure that I put a picture from one of the newspapers with the article on there. But yeah, so this was an insane case. Just imagine it, the most possible prolific serial killer in England, and this is a case that they're still investigating. I mean, they're still exhuming bodies and looking into it. So, I mean, it's a really cool ongoing thing. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know I definitely did. And I hope you guys have a nice day, evening, wherever you guys are at, whatever you guys are doing while listening to this podcast. I really appreciate it. So I'm just going to close this out with remember, guys, stay sexy and don't get murdered.